Welcome, champions. As you all know, this month, March, is the month of women, and this series is celebrating women in commemoration of International Women's Day 2024. Today, we will celebrate remarkable women working in the development sector. I have two guests here who will share their experiences, but we'll get to that. Why are there so many women working in the development sector? Could it be that a lot of women are leaders for social change? Could it be that they are compassionate and want to be able to drive social change? These are some of the conversations that we'll be having. This year's global theme for IWD 2024 is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. Now, what exactly does this mean? This means we have to show support and encouragement for women in what they do. The campaign theme is also #Inspire Inclusion. And so we are hoping that with some of these conversations, we'll be able to inspire women in the development sector, particularly the young ones. A lot of people do not know the amount of work that is put into social change. In Nigeria, women are at the fore of entrepreneurship and innovation, medicine, law, and so many other sectors. We want to be able to spotlight how women balance their personal lives and maintain leadership. And so we will be able to dive into some of these conversations with our two guests. My name is Agyampe Onyema. I am a governance expert and a development consultant, and I will pass on to our two guests to introduce themselves.
My name is Lillian Ekanyang. I'm a lawyer by training, and for the past 20 years, I've been active in the development sector. My journey to work in the development sector started with my volunteering with the International Federation of Women Lawyers, providing pro bono service for underprivileged women. Encountering corruption in that activity led me to Transparency International, where I worked for a while. And I have done my stint with government as well, working in a unit that coordinates data for the anti-corruption agencies. At the moment, I'm an independent consultant and an anti-corruption expert with the UNODC and several other international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Oluwafunke Adeoye. I am a lawyer as well, and I'm also the founder of Hope Behind Bars Africa. So I started my practice in the private sector, and I spent some time handling some pro bono criminal cases, which gave me insight into how we needed a lot of reforms in our criminal justice system. I also have a lived experience with how we have so many issues with our criminal justice system. And so I spent some time providing volunteering support with Amnesty International and a couple of other organizations. And in 2018, I started Hope Behind Bars Africa. So currently, Hope Behind Bars Africa has been working for the past 5 years to help reform the criminal justice system. Our mission is to close the justice and inequality gap using diversionary measures, legal support, technology, and evidence-based advocacy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here and being part of the conversation. So we will start with Madam, because you have longer years of experience in this sector. Can you share with us what actually drove you to start a career in the development sector?
Yes, I was practicing law, and I was a chair of the volunteer advocacy group of the International Federation of Women Lawyers. At that time, I was based in Lagos. In that activity, we used to go to court to provide pro bono service for women in the lower sector of the society. And most of them, the marriages and other kinds of transactions were contracted at the customary court level. And I was frequenting those courts in that activity, and I encountered corruption, very endemic corruption. And that led me to start seeking for support, and that was how I got in touch with Transparency International. The General Shola Williams was then the chair of Transparency in Nigeria, And through her encouragement, I got into advocacy to campaign against corruption until I actually coordinated the Zero Corruption Coalition for several years. And subsequently, I joined government to start the Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms, which provided a platform and coordinated data for anti-corruption agencies. I worked there for 14 years before I retired. And currently, I'm also active in the advocacy against corruption by working with development agencies and international organizations, campaigning against various types of corruption, and then also ensuring due process in the recovery and management of recovered assets. So that is my story.
You've actually shared a lot of some of the initiatives and projects that you've worked on, which is quite interesting. In your encounter with corruption, did you see anything that was targeted at women? Did you encounter like corruption specifically targeted at women that you want to bring to, like highlight and share with us? Is there any sort or some sort of bias against women in this sector that you had worked in?
Yes, especially for underprivileged women. Their cases do not get to the level of the high courts where you have a little bit of sanity. Most of their cases, when it has to do with marital and inheritance issues, was at the customary court level. At such levels, there's a lot of bias against women, even for trying to assert their rights, to actualize their rights. We had cases where I would appear in court for a woman, and then subsequently the team of judges, because they normally sit in a panel, after I had left court, they would invite the woman and said, "Why are you following those women who are confusing and deceiving you?" And they try to intimidate such women. So there was a lot of bias against women. First of all, the legal framework was inadequate, so we had to struggle. And secondly, there was a lot of intimidation. And of course, there was a financial issue. They couldn't afford representation unless we were able to give them pro bono service.
Yeah, I know that's very common because most of the women groups we see these days tend to support women to go to court and support pro bono services for women, which is very important. Thank you very much for that story. So Funke, let's go to you. I know you're a mother and you have young children. So how do you balance, this hard work? And you own your own organization, you run your own organization. And a lot of people do not see the hard work that is being put in the development sector. Is a high visibility sector. So what they see is the travel. They think there's some sort of glam and, we
Celebrity
do not,
status.
Yeah. We do not do any sort of work. So how do you balance, your personal life and, running this organization? And of course, you mentioned that you have somewhere to go to tomorrow. So how do you do this?
All right. Thank you very much for that question. I started my organization 3 months after my first child. And I had my first child through cesarean section. So it was me just heading right into motherhood. And I was a mother as I just had a child, and I was a mother as I just started an organization. And my second child is currently just turned 2. So it's been managing, raising young children and also raising a growing organization. I would say the first thing for me was the reason why I started, which was also very close to my being a mother. So I had lost a child. My first child was a twin. And so I had lost one of them to the inadequacies in the government health facility, and I was angry. And being a lawyer, the initial plan was to sue the government and, make all the noise and all of that. But instead, I looked at the trajectory of my career, how I had always wanted to help women, help people, vulnerable people in the criminal justice space. And I said to myself, if this is happening to me, that is here, and I have a little bit of support, what would happen to people who are within confinement? So starting my organization was more like, I was drawn, it was like purpose drew me into it. So that has been a major one for me, because I wouldn't say it has been all rosy. It has actually been very challenging, starting your organization. Apart from the volunteer experience I had not even worked in the nonprofit space. So I had to learn on the rope. And I would say that in terms of balancing, the first thing for me would be the support system. Yeah, there's no way I'm going to be here if I don't have a very strong support system. So my husband is super supportive. The first couple of years when I was still struggling with finances, still bootstrapping the organization myself, he was really, really helpful at the family level. And then even my mom, my sisters. I remember last year I had to be out of the country for about 2 months, and my baby was barely a year plus. So everyone had to take turns to come and stay at home. My mom, who lives in Lagos, had to come. My sister, my friend, we just had to, just help at that level. So I have a very strong support system. I don't try to do everything on my own. I delegate. So, right from when I had my first baby up to now, I've always had nannies at home and all of that. And then I also finally understand priorities. I know that for me, family and my husband and my children are very important. So the time I get to spend with them, I make sure that I give it, I'm very intentional with that time, so that when mommy has to be away from work or she has deadlines and she has to be on a laptop by 1 a.m., they don't feel all of that.
No, I totally get what you're saying. And I think a lot of women have had to pause their careers or lose their careers because they couldn't balance, motherhood and actually the kind of work that we do. There's a lot of travel. You either you are inspecting your projects in another state or maybe another country and all of that. And it means being away from the home front. And so I'm sure a lot of women have said, look, I can't do this. I'm just going to have to choose one over the other. But then again, why there are a lot of women in this sector? Why do you think so?
I think the first answer that comes to my mind is women are nurturers, right? This sector is a sector where, like my Leonard senior was saying, she saw a problem and she knew that I just had to fix it. Maybe some other person will be thinking, oh, okay, some other man will be thinking, how do I make money off this? But for us, when we see that problem, we want to find a way to address it. And just as you asked that question, I think about all of the change that has occurred in this country from activism, and I see that women have played a very phenomenal role. Look at NSAS, for instance. We had the Feminist Coalition. We had all of these young women, Aisha Yeshufu and the like, standing up. We look at Bring Back Our Girls. We had Obi Ezekwesili and all of these women. You look at even back in the years, the Aba Women Riots, the Egba Women Revolt, even down to independence, women have played a very phenomenal role. And I think it's because we are inborn nurturers. And there's just that innate thing of wanting to bet something. So you cannot take away the place of the women. And if only, I know that's not the question you asked, and if only we would be allowed spaces to govern, some of the problems we are facing in the country today, we would not be experiencing.
I totally agree with you on that. I think Nigerian women are doing exceptionally well everywhere except in political leadership.
And we're not represented.
Exactly. We're not represented. And you can see that in the way the country is. And you made a point about men looking for opportunity. Exactly.
Usually,
so they are breadwinners. All they think about is, most of what they think about is how to cater for my home financially. And so they are driven by that. But, a woman, education, health, she's the one that takes care of the child. Back to you, madam. In your opinion, what do you think organizations can do to help employees, especially women, to support work-life balance for their employees?
Organizations should be intentional. First of all, about getting in more women into certain positions and then creating room for work-life balance. For instance, larger organizations should think about providing crèches or other platforms where women can keep their children so that they can work with some level of rest of mind. And there should also be other supportive services. The work environment should be both women and child friendly. Because most of the time you can't separate the two. And because of the socio-cultural biases that we're still struggling with, organizations should consider affirmative action, because we can't do away with it for now. And even in very developed countries, they still do a level of affirmative action for women. We still need to embrace that for a while until we're able to catch up.
So when you say affirmative action, does this mean giving a certain quota for female employees in an office? And
Precisely.
Yeah.
Reserve a certain quota for female employees, and then even opening up traditional male spaces so that women who desire can fit into that. Only last week, as part of the celebration for the International Women's Day, the UNODC showcased a female driver who had just been employed.
wow.
Yeah, so this is not something you see often. But if a woman desires to fit into that role, she should be encouraged. Such spaces can be opened up so that more women will have more chances of employment.
I like the example you just brought about the female driver, because very recently as well, as part of the IWD celebration, I saw on Instagram a set of security women for the first time, I think in Akwa Ibom State or somewhere, and like all of them female bouncers and security for your events. And I had never seen that. That was something that I felt was really, really good. But in some of the comments you see on social media, what I realize is that men do not understand what this gender equality is about. They think is that women are coming to take over or trample on them. They don't respect them, or to give 50-50. And I found myself having to explain that there's a difference between equality and equity. Equality doesn't mean that we are equal. So can you throw some light for us in terms of how we think that promoting gender equality and the exact meaning, because you spoke a bit about it, the opportunities. So just throw some light so that it's something that can have a bit of clarification.
Yes, equality does not mean putting both on a scale and see how much they weigh. It's more like creating equal opportunities. And for the women to lean towards the areas that they feel more comfortable with, and then also the men to lean towards their own traditional areas. When you talk about equality, you're also talking about equity. There's this meme that you see on social media a lot that talks about two different kinds of animals feeding from the same trough. One with a long beak and another one with like a goat or other kind of this thing. If the container is narrow, then you're doing a disfavor to the one with a normal, like a goat or a cat or something. Then if it is wide, you're now doing a disfavor to the one with a long beak. So when you talk about equity and equality, provide platform in recognition of the different aspirations and the different makeup of the two gender. That's what we're talking about. Nobody is trying to overtake the other. I personally would not want to be a man. And I'm sure most men will not want to be women. So the competition, that level of competition should not be there at all. Yeah. We're talking about fairness, equity, being justice to all according to their nature. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right and spot on with that clarification. But as it is, there are traditional roles for a man and traditional roles for a woman. But in recent times, like I said to someone, we see nail technicians that are men. That didn't used to happen before. And then women who want to be pilots and, engineering and things like that. And as we grow further and there's globalization and the rest of those things, people tend to mix up into those career roles, and nobody should be exempted, that's the way I feel, like saying, oh, you're a woman, don't go into this role. You're a man, don't do this role. If people want to be able to be cooks, chefs, anything, I mean, it should be allowed. So, Funke, how do you prioritize self-care and your well-being in the midst of a very busy career?
Okay, thank you for that question. I mean, self-care is very, very important, especially when you're doing this kind of work where every other day we work with vulnerable people. We go to prison and we hear the stories of the women. We hear the stories of many people, because most of the people we work with are people who don't have any business being in prison. So we hear all of these stories, and usually you go back home, and in trying to create interventions or design interventions that will help them, you actually internalize it. And then when we begin to engage with the government and it looks as if it's taking a lot of time, it's really, really brings a lot of stress. So I am glad that this question is coming now, because if you had asked me this question 2 years ago, I wouldn't have anything to say. But about 2 years ago, about the time I had my second child, I had to see a therapist for the first time. And that was because...
Wow.
As my generation would say, we get coconut head. After I had my son, I knew I was supposed to take some rest. I knew I was supposed to take maternity leave and all. And I'm the founder, so I could have done that. But I just felt like there was just so much to do. So I was juggling. I just had a baby, and I was juggling a fellowship. I was working, and I had a breakdown.
Which is the flip side of what you just said. Because you are the founder, it
Yes.
also means that the responsibility
Yes.
on you for the
Yes.
organization to succeed
Yes,
is
yes.
even more.
Yes, and that was 2 years ago. We were still struggling with a whole lot of things, putting structures and all. But when I had that session with the therapist, I realized that for me to do my work well, I needed to prioritize myself. And so I had to take some time off. And then I started doing some of the things I love to do. So going to the gym, swimming. I just found, that time for swimming, and also taking my kids for swimming. Yeah, I realized that just taking that time, even if it's twice a month, it made a whole lot of difference. And between then and now, when I get to that point of exhaustion, because it always comes, when I get to that point where I can see a burnout coming in because of a whole lot, I just take some time off. This year, there are times, twice this year, I've had to just take some time off, go to a hotel and just stay for a night, just to clear my head. And then finally, my faith is very important to me. And I've always prioritized my faith when it comes to self-care. So I pray, I ask God for strength, and somehow I just find the strength.
Well done.
Thank you.
I'm going to digress a bit. When you talked about the prisons,
Yes.
So have you ever encountered like a pregnant?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A whole lot of them. We've worked with pregnant women. We've worked with children, women that are breastfeeding, nursing mothers, a whole lot. And just today I was writing an article, and I remember the woman we met once in prison who was arrested by her husband. So she had a child and lost the child, found out that she had given her child HIV. Wow. She didn't even know her status, and found out that her husband had been taking antiretroviral drugs for 3 years without, and then she lashed on her husband, assaulted him, and she found herself in prison. Yes. No, he didn't die, thankfully. Okay. Yes, he didn't die. We find all of those kind of cases, and to a very large extent, many of the women we work with are victims of crime themselves. Yeah. Sadly, our system doesn't have a structure or a platform for supporting victims of crime. So you find people that are victims of domestic and gender-based violence who, the first time they decide to retaliate, that's the time the husband decides to die, or, whatever it is. We visited Adamawa. So we have only 3 female correctional facilities in the country, and one of them is in Adamawa. And there were just about 9 women when we went there. 80% of them were actually women who killed their husband, child brides at some point, and all of that. So we've encountered those kind of women a lot. And sadly, our correctional facilities are not gender sensitive, because we actually have less women in prison, just about 2%. So the facilities, antenatal care is almost zero. The women with children stay in the same cells as every other woman. The health, everything is actually really, really zero. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
I agree with you. I think generally we're not just gender sensitive, or again, if you talk about marginalized groups. So people just see things in black and white, That's the same conversation people with disabilities also try to make, and I don't blame them, because really Nigeria needs to put more effort into being gender sensitive and disability sensitive, inclusive generally. Social inclusion is not one of our strengths. We just see things as not so we did do them before, so we just continue. But I mean, I guess this is why for IWD these conversations always come up every time, because we need to keep making the point that women are supposed to be treated differently. We can't be treated like men. Although we of course have equal status as human beings, there are certain things that are peculiar to a woman. For instance, pregnancy, and we touched menstruation. That's even like the easiest or the most common one. From 10 years old, 12. So you have your children, male, female, but one person starts at 10 or 11 years old to start menstruating. So these are some of the conversations that we think we should keep making and emphasizing. And we've touched, across board, nursing mothers, in the essence of crèches in offices. So people don't lose their jobs just because they have children and things like that. So I think we should talk about support networks amongst women. Is there anything you can share? Have you had to rely on women networks? Because when a group of women sit down together to talk, there are several things that come up and people are like, we don't have these conversations enough. So have you at any point in your career had to rely on mentorship, support network from other women to be able to just put yourself back in place and say, okay, I can go on?
I have had the experience of having women who have aided my career in one form or the other. For instance, who have identified some abilities within you and encouraged it, and have also tried to do the same for the women I have worked with and the women I encounter in various ways. So I try to mentor the younger ones and provide a sort of a listening ear to their problems. But what you're saying about the support networks is critical. The area where I saw the importance of this network is when I was chairing the volunteer advocacy group of FIDA. Yes, in that activity I encountered a lot of women who needed legal services, who also needed other kinds of services. So from apart from offering them legal services, you find yourself also providing support they're trying to start small businesses and other kinds of things. So those support networks are very important and should be encouraged. And the ones I see more often are in places of worship. Yes, in a lot of places of worship, you have such support networks for women. And in the local communities, of course, it is very strong. Most of us, local communities in the villages, you have a lot of support network amongst the women.
Yeah, but sometimes that support network always seems like an exclusion from what the male people in the village are doing. Sometimes I find that the division. So I've not really seen that.
The socio-cultural, the cultural biases are of course there.
Prominent.
Yes, they are prominent. But in those environments, the women are never completely left alone. Whether it is childcare, whether it is health issues, they will always find a shoulder to cry on. It is our responsibility now to sort of improve on those structures and try and remove the biases. Yes, so that the structures can grow into something healthier.
Or sort of formalize them in a way that people see the benefits and they use, not just, I'm just helping you. Because when you call it like a support network, it is what it is. I know that if I'm going there, this is what I'm going to benefit from being there. Not that, like in the local communities, is informal, but everybody's like, she has a child. We're all there as women because we share the same experiences, we understand. And yes, I can see and relate with how that works there. But you're right, it needs to be formalized, made much, maybe talked about a lot more at our own level, lift it up to be able to say, oh, women need this more. Because it comes up every time, the conversation. It's like, no, we don't talk about this enough. We don't do this. We don't that. And I'm beginning to see that we really don't talk about it, because by now, I don't see why a crutch in an office is a big deal.
Yeah.
It should not be
At all.
Because if you have 4 or 5 female staff, you should be able to project that in the next 1-2 years, one of them, even if you got all of them single, if they are between the ages of 27 to 30. Even now, people finish school at 21. So let's even say 23 to 30. In the next 2, 3, 4 years, one of them is going to get married, 2 of them, 3. And then if you're looking at retaining this staff, then you should be able to think, for the future and say that, yes, when we get a crutch, these 3 other 4 people are going to be part of it. I think that's something the banks are doing well, and maybe it should be encouraged in smaller organizations. So what advice will you give other women who are aspiring to come into the development sector? Because I know there are a lot of single young ladies who are beginning to come into the sector. A lot of them feel challenged when they see that the work is a lot. Because to be honest, someone like me, I didn't get married till my late 30s. And I had already been in the sector for at least 7 years.
Wow.
Yes. So when I got married.
Yes.
So when I met my husband, I met him through my work.
Oh, okay.
Which is very interesting. But I met him through my work. He didn't have a problem with it. Like, okay, coming back home at 5, 6, 7, even when we have deadlines, sometimes you get back home, you're sleeping and you just remember, I did not send this email. 3 a.m. you just jump up, and that is the nature of our work. People just don't know, but that's the nature of our work. There was a time that I didn't see my friends for months, and I am a very social person. I like to hang out, and people were like, "Are you sure you're in this?" I'm like, "Please, I have things to do. I need to finish them." So I feel like when people see this from the outside, because perception is in different ways, people see different things. So when young ladies who are coming to the development sector see this, they might either be scared, or they started a few years and they're like, I need to do something else. I'm not sure I'm going to get married at this rate. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I will respond to that question with the last question you asked her, and even her response. And just looking at my life, I think one thing that has helped me is that support network. But for me, the support network is a little bit closed. So accountability partners. Yes, you have a much higher person who has some experience, who has been in this space before you. Is there a way that you can, look up to that person as an accountability partner, or draw some support from them? And I'm not saying that they should go about looking for every Tom, Dick, and Harry and asking them to mentor them, because I get that often. People reach out to me, we don't have any relationship, nothing, and you're just asking me to mentor you. I'm like,
because they see you.
I mean, I didn't do that.
So
I didn't do that during my time. What I would usually say is find a way to add value. So there were certain women in my space who I respected, I acknowledged. I just found a way to reach out. Oh, gee, you need help in this way. Volunteer for them. I volunteered for Amnesty International a couple of months before I started my organization, and Osai has been she's no longer with Amnesty International. But while she was there, she was really instrumental to some of the things that happened for me in the growth of my work. So find some way to give value to someone who is ahead of you, and then see how you can learn from them. Because like you were saying, outside, the perception looks like everything is all glam, but you need to come close for you to hear about the deadlines. It only takes that closer Oh God, don't go to the report. Can we do it without? Can we report? You see that report? Let's not go there. It feels like why do we need to go through all the rigor of the report, financial report, everything? But then for accountability purposes, that's really, really important. So it's important that they have that understanding of what's really like in the system. And also that there is satisfaction in the space. I mean, we're in a country where we might not see what we want immediately, but that little satisfaction that comes from helping someone, knowing that somebody's life is impacted by your work, just on that understanding should help keep you in the game for a long haul.
Okay, can you share with us like a memorable or rewarding experience?
Oh, I have a lot. Which? Oh, okay, let me talk about someone we helped. He's a guy, but I represented him myself. This was in 2019. I had gone to Kuje Correctional Facility and I met this young man who had been in prison for 5 years for an offense he did not commit. So he had been picked up by SARS, and he spent about 6 months in SARS custody, and he was pinned to somebody else and accused of armed robbery and conspiracy. So he spent 5 years awaiting trial. 2 years out of that 5 years, he would go to court and the prosecutor would not show up. So he kept going to court like that for 2 years. And I took up his case, and it was just one appearance. The first time I appeared, it was the High Court in Jabi, and I just used a particular provision of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, Section 351, talking about the prosecutor is negligent, blah, 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 and all of that. So the court should strike out the matter. I was just trying my luck because armed robbery is a capital offense. Yeah, so I was just trying my luck. And it was as though the judge was tired of the case. He was waiting. And I can remember that day he gave a lot of ruling. He gave a very long ruling, backlashing the Ministry of Justice for just taking up frivolous cases and wasting the time of the court. And that guy was released. Everybody was shocked because this is me that came. I just announced my appearance for the first time for this young man, very young guy, about 25-year-old at the time. Everybody was excited.
What year was this?
This is 2019.
Okay.
But that's not even where the story gets interesting. That young man today is married. He has a daughter. He's made a lot out of his life. In fact, he's one of our ambassadors.
Wow.
Yes.
That's
So
very
every time I think of his story and that it was just one appearance, it gives me a lot of joy that, we're able to do something like that for someone.
I guess these are the little things that
Yes.
makes people go on in their
Yes.
work. And
Yes.
Madam, can you share, any rewarding experience that you've had in?
There have been several, especially helping women get their inheritance when they lose their husbands. There's an air crash widow. I think it was a Kenya Airways air crash. They almost robbed her of.
Wow.
She had 2 children. They almost robbed her of her entitlements. We stepped in, went to court, and got the court to put the money in an account where they can't reach it until the case was determined.
Wow.
And this is a very ambitious young lady. She was quite young at that time. I see her a number of times, and I see what she has made out of her life, and I feel good that I stepped into the gap at that time. But for me, one of the more interesting, rewarding experiences was at an Charles de Gaulle airport one time. Somebody now came. I missed my flight, and the person had also missed her flight from Ireland, and we were all going to be put into a hotel till the following day. This woman came to hug me. It took me a while to recognize her. It happened that she was one of the cases, one of the women I defended. A prominent Nigerian, she was married to a prominent Nigerian who, I don't know, ordinarily you won't find such class of people being married under native land custom alone, but that was what happened to her. He now went to the customary court and tried to divorce her and take her son without paying any kind of, alimony or anything. So we stepped in, and, because the man was very anxious to get married to someone else because he felt that he had outgrown the woman. What we were able to negotiate. By that time, she too had realized that there was no point staying in the marriage. She said, well, he has a lot of money. Why does he not help me? I want to migrate, go and further my education. So that was what we negotiated. And the man reluctantly agreed, settled money on her, and then got her visas and everything. She went to Ireland. By the time I now ran into her years later, she had a master's degree.
Wow.
She had been married. I couldn't even recognize her. She came and hugged me from the back in Charles de Gaulle. I said, Madam, don't you remember me? I'm so person. I was almost in tears.
I can imagine.
So there are several of such good moments. And for the younger people, what it takes is interest. There's a lot. This sector is tedious, but there's a lot of satisfaction. In lots of times, you see the reward of your hard work. You see the results.
Yeah, I like how you just ended that, saying that for the young people, it's really about interest. You've heard it all. I think, first of all, to succeed in the development sector and be able to balance your work life, interest should be paramount. And I think the conversation never ends. It is not exhaustive. So we're going to have another episode dedicated to women in development. And so I remain your host, Agyampe Onyema, and I look forward to seeing you next time.